When my marriage to Steve fell apart and the public's version of my fairy tale kind of went into crisis, I did a series of movies that got badly reviewed, and although some of them made a ton of money, my kind of fairy dust started falling off.
Steve McQueen was the most magnetic movie star of his generation, and Ali MacGraw was the most sought-after actress in Hollywood. When they fell in love on a film set in 1972, the world treated it like the inevitable collision of two perfect things. What the world did not see was what happened once the cameras stopped rolling and they were alone. What Ali has said about those years, in her memoir, in interviews, and in the reflections she has offered now at 87, describes something the fairy tale version of their story was never designed to contain. The cost of loving Steve McQueen was her career, her sense of self, and very nearly everything else. The demand she agreed to that changed everything. Before getting into what the marriage actually looked like from the inside, the single most important fact to understand about Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen is what he asked her to do before the wedding and what she agreed to, because that agreement is the foundation of everything that followed, and it explains why a woman at the absolute peak of her professional life ended up spending the most productive years of her career doing none of the work that had made her famous. When they married in July of 1973, McQueen was the highest-paid actor in the world. His salary per film was in the range that no other actor could approach. He had built that position through a combination of genuine talent and an iron insistence on his own terms, and those terms extended into his personal life in ways that were not negotiable. He did not want a wife who worked. More specifically, he did not want a wife whose public profile could compete with or complicate his own. Ali MacGraw, at the time she agreed to this, was not a minor actress making a convenient concession. She had just come off Love Story, the film that had transformed her from a promising newcomer into one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema. The film had earned over $100 million worldwide, an enormous sum in 1970. She had received an Academy Award nomination. Producers were pursuing her for roles. She was, in every measurable sense, at the moment when careers either consolidate into something lasting or begin to dissipate for want of momentum. She chose McQueen over the momentum. She has been honest about why she made that choice, in ways that are more illuminating than a simple account of romantic sacrifice would suggest. She was, by her own account, somewhat terrified of him in the specific way that intensely charismatic and emotionally unpredictable people tend to generate in those who love them. She feared what losing him would feel like more than she feared what losing her career would feel like, which is a particular kind of calculus that makes complete sense emotionally and almost no sense in retrospect. So she signed the prenuptial agreement he presented, which protected his assets in the event of divorce. She stepped away from Hollywood. She moved into the beach house in Malibu and learned, in her own description, to play the role of a simple woman to the absolute hilt. She cooked, she cleaned, she managed the household and raised her son Joshua, who she had from her previous marriage to Robert Evans. She became, in other words, a supporting character in someone else's story at the precise moment her own story was most interesting. What makes this particularly significant is the context of who Robert Evans was and what he represented in her life before McQueen. Evans was the head of production at Paramount Pictures. He had cast her in Love Story. He had been her husband, her collaborator, and in many ways the architect of the career she then walked away from. Their marriage had ended when she began her affair with McQueen during the filming of The Getaway in 1972, a film Evans had arranged for her to appear in. The symmetry of that is something she has reflected on in interviews over the years. The recognition that the relationship she left everything for then required her to leave everything for it again, in a different and more permanent way. She did not work again in any significant capacity for several years. The roles she might have taken went to other women. The momentum she had built dissipated in exactly the way it would have if she had simply stopped showing up, which is essentially what happened. She showed up for McQueen instead, and McQueen, it turned out, was considerably more complicated to show up for than any film set she had ever worked on. What jealousy looked like when it lived in the same house. Steve McQueen's jealousy was not an occasional feature of his personality that emerged during specific provocations. It was a constant environmental condition of the marriage, present regardless of whether Ali had done anything to invite it, and operating according to a logic that had more to do with his own psychological history than with anything she actually did. His childhood had been genuinely difficult. His father abandoned the family before McQueen was old enough to have any memory of him. His mother, who struggled with her own considerable problems, sent him away at various points to live with relatives and eventually with a reform school institution that was not a gentle environment for a sensitive child. He came out of that history with a foundational distrust of people, particularly women, that he was never able to fully work through, regardless of how much success, wealth, or adoration subsequently surrounded him. Ali has described his jealousy as flaring up at almost nothing. A look in a direction he did not authorize. A conversation that lasted longer than he thought it should. Ordinary social interactions that, filtered through his particular anxiety, looked like evidence of betrayal. She learned to manage her behavior in public and private to avoid triggering it, which is the kind of adaptive self-censorship that people in controlling relationships develop so gradually that they barely notice it happening until they look back from a distance and realize how much of themselves they had quietly excised. The particular cruelty of the jealousy was its asymmetry. While Ali was modifying her behavior to prevent any appearance of interest in other men, McQueen was widely understood within Hollywood to be conducting himself without similar restraint. His infidelities were not a secret within the circles that surrounded them. Stories circulated. People knew. Ali knew or suspected, and the combination of knowing and being expected to accept it while simultaneously being held accountable for infractions that did not meet that standard was a specific kind of humiliation that she has described with considerable directness in the years since. She has talked about the fear that underlay her compliance. She was afraid of his anger, and she was afraid of what losing him would feel like. And those two fears operated in a mutually reinforcing way that kept her in a position she might otherwise have left much earlier. The pattern she describes is one that will be recognizable to anyone familiar with how controlling relationships sustain themselves. The person being controlled is given just enough warmth and connection to make the prospect of leaving feel like a loss too large to accept, while the control simultaneously prevents the kind of autonomous self-development that would make leaving possible. His substance use added another layer of unpredictability. He drank heavily and used substances in ways that affected his behavior and made the emotional temperature of the household impossible to predict. Ali, who developed her own serious problem with alcohol during these years, has been clear about the connection between his substance use, the environment it created, and the beginning of her own dependency. She was not looking for relief from an abstract stress. She was looking for relief from a specific person in a specific household. And the thing she reached for turned out to be as dangerous as what she was reaching away from. The marriage that the public saw, glimpsed in paparazzi photographs and occasional profile pieces, looked like exactly what people expected it to look like. Two extraordinarily beautiful people in a romantic setting on the California coast. The marriage that Ali lived was something else entirely, and she has spent the better part of 40 years finding the language to describe the distance between those two things. The moment she chose herself and what it cost her. The decision that ended the marriage was not a dramatic confrontation or a discovered betrayal. It was something quieter and in some ways more significant. Ali MacGraw told Steve McQueen she wanted to go back to work. By 1977, she had been out of professional circulation for approximately 4 years. The career she had built, which had been at its peak when she stepped away, had not frozen in place, waiting for her return. Hollywood does not work that way. The roles she had been considered for had been given to other women. The momentum was gone, but the desire to work, to use the skills she had developed, and return to the work that had given her a sense of identity before McQueen had reorganized everything around his own, had not gone away. It had simply been suppressed, and by 1977, it was no longer suppressible. When she told him, his response was immediate and definitive. He told her that, if that was her decision, they would be filing for divorce. There was no negotiation, no discussion of how they might accommodate both her desire to work and his preference that she not. He had established the terms of the marriage before it began, and he regarded her announcement as a violation of those terms. His position was consistent, at least, with who he had always been. The problem was that she had changed, and there was no version of what he was offering that had room for who she was becoming. She accepted the role in Convoy, directed by Sam Peckinpah, who had also directed The Getaway, where she and McQueen had first fallen in love. The symbolic weight of that particular choice, returning to work in a film made by the same director who had set the whole story in motion, is something she has not belabored in interviews, but that is difficult to ignore. The divorce was finalized in 1978. She was 39 years old. She had given the middle years of her career to a marriage that ended because she decided she was entitled to have one. McQueen remarried within the year, a woman named Barbara Minty, who was 23 years old at the time, which is its own comment on the specific form his need for control took in his relationships. 2 years after the divorce, in November of 1980, Steve McQueen died from pleural mesothelioma, a cancer caused by asbestos exposure at the age of 50. He had been exposed to asbestos during his time in the Marine Corps and later through his involvement in automobile racing. The illness had progressed rapidly. He was dead within a year of his diagnosis. Ali has described the grief that came with his death as complicated in a way that simple grief is not. She had loved him. She had also lived through years of being managed, controlled, and diminished by him. Those two facts existed simultaneously, and the grief she felt was tangled up with everything the marriage had been, not just the parts that looked good in photographs. She has said she wished they had both found sobriety earlier, which is the most compressed possible description of everything that went wrong between them. What her own addiction looked like from the inside. The story of Ali MacGraw's alcoholism is not a sidebar to the story of her marriage to Steve McQueen. It is directly connected to it, and she has been clear about that connection in ways that required her to hold two uncomfortable truths simultaneously: that she made her own choices, and that the environment she was living in shaped what choices were available to her. She grew up in a household where alcoholism was already present. Her father's drinking was a feature of her childhood, and the instability it created contributed to the low self-confidence and hunger for external validation that she has identified as running threads through her early adult life. She arrived at her relationship with McQueen with those vulnerabilities already established. What the marriage did was create conditions in which reaching for alcohol made a particular kind of sense, because it offered a temporary reduction in the anxiety that living with an unpredictable and controlling person generates. The isolation was a significant factor. She had given up work, which meant she had given up the social world that professional life provides. She was in Malibu, in a beach house that was beautiful and somewhat removed from the ordinary texture of social life. She was managing a household and a child and a husband whose moods could shift in ways that were difficult to anticipate and impossible to control. Alcohol reduced the edge of all of that. It made the evenings more manageable. And then it became something she needed rather than something she chose, which is the standard progression of the thing. After McQueen's death, she continued working, and the drinking continued alongside the work. She appeared in Convoy. She took a 14-episode arc on Dynasty in 1984, which brought her back to significant public visibility but did not represent the career recovery that Love Story had once seemed to promise. She was working, but the architecture of what her career might have been had she not stepped away during its most important years was gone, and she was building something smaller in the space where something larger might have existed. The decision to enter treatment at the Betty Ford Center came in the early 1990s, and she has described it as a genuine turning point, rather than a milestone she had been working toward. The recovery process required her to examine not just the drinking, but everything the drinking had been covering: the marriages, the career that had been surrendered and then partially lost, the years of self-suppression, the grief that she had not fully processed at any of the multiple points when it had accumulated. She has been sober for more than 30 years. That number is not incidental. Maintaining sobriety for 30 years requires a consistent daily practice, a set of priorities organized around maintaining the clarity that sobriety provides, and a willingness to keep examining the things that made the dependency possible in the first place. She has done all of that, and the person who exists on the other side of that process is someone who is able to speak about her past with an honesty that the person inside it could not have accessed. She has said she is not a victim. She means it. She also means everything she has said about what those years cost her, who she became when the noise stopped. Ali MacGraw left Hollywood in 1994 and moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The decision was not driven by failure or by being pushed out, although the career trajectory of her later years had been considerably more modest than her early ones. It was driven by a recognition that the life she wanted to live was not compatible with the life that Los Angeles required of her, and that she had spent enough years living according to other people's requirements. Santa Fe gave her something she had not had in any consistent way across the preceding decades. Ordinary days with no particular demand on them. She gardened. She practiced yoga and meditation, both of which became serious commitments rather than casual interests. She surrounded herself with animals. She developed a painting practice. She found that the things she had set aside in favor of career and relationships and the maintenance of a public persona were the things that actually sustained her, and that the public persona had been costing her energy she could have been spending on the sustaining things all along. She published her memoir, Moving Pictures, in 1991, before the move to Santa Fe and before the full consolidation of her sobriety. The book is honest in the specific way that memoirs written by people who are still in the middle of their reckoning tend to be, complete in some respects and provisional in others, a first serious attempt at the account rather than the final version. She has given interviews in the years since that have added dimensions to the story that the memoir did not fully reach, and those interviews, taken together, constitute a more complete picture of what she has actually understood about her own life than any single document could contain. She did not remarry. She has not suggested she regrets that choice or that she was waiting for something that did not arrive. She has spoken about choosing herself after decades of organizing her life around other people and the way that choice requires a kind of sustained daily practice rather than a single decision. It is not a dramatic resolution. It is an ordinary discipline, pursued quietly in a small city in New Mexico, far from the context that made her famous. In 2016, she appeared on stage with Ryan O'Neal in a touring production of Love Letters, reuniting the two actors whose names have been linked since Love Story more than 4 decades earlier. The production reminded audiences of who she had been at the beginning of her public life, and the ease of the chemistry between them suggested that some of what had made that film so resonant was genuine rather than simply performed. She has spoken about O'Neal with warmth and without the complicated emotional freight that surrounds her discussions of McQueen. At 87, she talks about McQueen with the clarity that 30 years of sobriety and genuine self-examination produces. She does not deny the attraction. She does not minimize what the marriage extracted from her. She holds both things at once, which is the hardest thing to do with any experience that contained real love and real damage simultaneously. She survived it, examined it, and is still here to describe it. That is, finally, the whole story. If Ali MacGraw gave up the career that defined her, the freedom that sustained her, and very nearly herself to stay close to a man she was also afraid of, what does that tell us about the specific kind of power that charisma and danger can have over even the most capable people? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.